I would say for anyone who's like trying to either like level up, get into a new field, just start engaging or creating content around whatever that is, and just putting yourself out there. That's the main thing. I think just simply sending out resumes clearly does not work for a lot of people. So it's like you have to create something outside of that very linear path, whether it's a podcast or whether it's like posting on LinkedIn or doing your own social media. I think for all stages of people, you have to figure out some version of that these days, because otherwise you're just another name in like a sea of people.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Dan Gould to The Flame. Dan is a top voice in cultural strategy and innovation with a wealth of experience leading teams at Reddit, Google, and Sparks and Honey. He's worked with brands like Disney and Unilever and has a passion for uncovering insights that drive creativity. Dan's journey is all about finding the human truths that connect us, and I can't wait to dive into his story today. So, you got a chance to listen to the first episode?
A chunk of it. So I guess I'm like starting to interview you. So like, just walk me through why you started this podcast, because I think I've seen what you've written about it, but I feel like there's definitely a big need for people to kind of have inspiration during this crazy kind of very unusual like world of work that's come about in the last year or so.
Yeah. It was part of that. It was, just trying to figure out what I wanted to do. It was, my time with Dragon's group was cut short. I was kind of blindsided by it and went through, several months of feeling really awful, just about myself and thinking about, what the hell am I going to do? Like, I feel like I'm starting over again because I just got laid off in November. Right. And I just, I was lucky enough to land a spot right away. So I was kind of riding high for a little bit. And then it was like, what am I going to do? And then aside from just feeling awful about sending out resumes all the time and not getting any response and trying to figure out where I want to, do I really just want to jump right back into another agency or another company, without really understanding, what it is I want to do or what I'm good at. I think we kind of all go through that imposter syndrome, right? As a designer, you're not really thinking about, you're just kind of, doing the work that's handed to you. But as you kind of move up, you're doing less in the weeds stuff, and you're trying to be creative and lead a team. And, I like doing that stuff, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of that imposter syndrome out there. And then when I'm going online and looking at LinkedIn, I just keep seeing story and story and story after, and post after, of people going through the same things and feeling like crap because they're sending out interview or resumes to places and they're just not hearing back, or they're getting ghosted. And it's really disheartening. So I went through a lot of that, feeling really disheartened, feeling really lost. And, in trying to keep myself engaged and feeling like I was being productive, I started working with a mentor, creative coach, who just advised me to, start putting yourself out there, start posting on LinkedIn, start coming up with ideas and things that you can comment on. And one of them was the idea for the podcast. And originally I think it was supposed to, I think my idea was I was thinking about helping people that were just starting out, because I wanted to see like, what are the differences with the kids coming out of school now. And, especially in the program that I graduated from at Drexel. So my idea was to just kind of zone in on the Drexel kids, and maybe talk to the staff there, some of the professors that are still there from when I was there, and see if there could be something, a way to, figure out what the youth is stepping into. But then also maybe I could be a bit of a guide for them. And then also to talk to the professors about how what they've seen change, creatively and culturally in the past 20 some odd years. But then I just kept, coming back to the idea of trying to help and support people that were feeling the same way that I was.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
That's kind of how it started.
I feel like the advice is probably somewhat similar because, up until maybe like pre-pandemic or just post, things were a lot more linear when you were thinking about like getting work and like progressing and like and now things have gone like completely like non-linear and chaotic because, like you said, putting resumes out just feels like shooting them into the void right now.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I'm both like running my own business right now, but also like, entertaining roles. So I'm having like both experiences. And like, I was shocked one day when I actually got an email like the same day from sending a resume out. But that was like that's like one out of like hundreds. So the whole process is bizarre, and there's a lot of speculation of some of these jobs being ghost jobs, like, and or overly efficient AI systems like automatically weeding people out. So it's a very like from both sides of the spectrum, whether you're like further along in your career or whether you're younger, it's just you don't know what you're going to get when you're putting stuff out there. And I think to your earlier point, like, and this is probably for younger people and more senior people, it's like, I think both to give yourself something to do and it's kind of to stay top of mind. It's like you have to be out there and creating stuff and posting and because otherwise it's like you're lost in the sea of like, thousands and millions of people who are in similar positions.
Right. Yeah. And even when you hit up your network, I feel like, that's the first way. I would go to the network that I have, people that are in agencies that I want to be at, find a posting and ask them to put the referral in. I've done that dozens of times. It doesn't seem to make a difference. So the only other way that you can stand out is to try to create and try to find ways to become visible, through the the analytics and the algorithms and all that stuff. Like, you got to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much a game of personal branding, which is sort of an overused term, but it's kind of like you have to define yourself in some way. Not because it's like there's plenty of people that probably have lots of like merit on paper or whatnot, but yeah, if you're not kind of top of mind from that standpoint, it's very easy to just get washed out. Like I even look at, so I'm sort of an adjacent industry, like doing research, whether that's for like design or creative or marketing. And I even think about LinkedIn titles and how like they all kind of like can seem the same. And so there's like, you even have like, I've experimented like, and kind of gone very rogue with my LinkedIn profile, just like playing around with things, because it's like everything can kind of look the same if you don't do something. So I haven't cracked the code, but that's one angle I've been thinking of. Yeah, the imposter syndrome, so I've gone through several kind of sagas of what we're talking about. So I could jump back to my deep past and then move to the present, which might be interesting.
Yeah, I was wondering that. It seemed like you've got a lot of experience with from the strategic side with insights, innovation, and culture, and how that all kind of blends together. And so I feel like strategy and that line of work is something that you creatives kind of fall into, and maybe you're not going to school with like, oh, I want to be a strategist. So like, how did you kind of come into that intersection of like creativity and strategy? Because I think it's a good starting point to understand, the whole, where your mindset is in terms of what motivates you and finding, what it is that you want to do or what your goal is in your career. And that's kind of where I started in that first episode. And I think it helps to kind of center yourself when you're in a situation like this, where you're feeling really unsure. And then it's kind of like, all right, where's my North Star a little bit? And it goes back to maybe going back to the beginning a little bit. So if you could start there, that'd be great.
So my background is very much from a creative background. So growing up, I was like really into comic books, into drawing and illustration and things like that. So I went to art school. I went to Syracuse University, just kind of, so the first year you kind of study all of different kinds of art. And then I was like, ended up doing video art, which is sort of predates like YouTube. It was just like the famous video artists. I don't know if you're familiar with any of them, but it basically had kind of the most creative freedom out of all the disciplines. And on the sideline, I was doing things like making flyers for parties that I would DJ at. So I was slowly building up graphic design skills while going to art school. So my only exposure to the industry that I'm in now was two things. One was Gerald Celente, who runs the Trends Research Institute. He's like one of the older trend forecasters. And I read an article in Fast Company, which was like super pivotal about this guy Watswacker. So he used to be at Stanford, and then he started his own company. He basically was doing kind of this cultural research. This is like pre all these technologies we have right now. So he was interviewing people. He would do things like go undercover and work at McDonald's. He would, it's so crazy. He even pretended to be a panhandler. So he was like studying culture and like all these unusual kind of ethnographic ways and advising all these big companies about what's coming next. Like his big book is called like What Comes After What Comes Next. And I was like, this is fascinating. I was like, this is so interesting because it's like, kind of like deeply understanding what's going on in the world and kind of being able to advise towards positive change. I was reading a lot of like Buckminster Fuller and things like that. These really like idealistic, designers in the largest sense of the word. And so that I always had that in the back of my mind that I wanted to get into this, but like the industry was a lot smaller. And so I just kind of had this seed planted. And then in the meantime, I actually dropped out of college my senior year. So this is like adds to the saga because I was like kind of didn't know where I was going. So I got a bunch of jobs working in the printing industry and doing graphic design. But I always had this notion in the back of my mind. I was like, I really want to work in this field. And then slowly at the time, there started to be like a lot of boutique agencies that were coming up. And well, I'll tell the dramatic part of the story. So I was working at this printing company. I was like super dissatisfied with my life, although it was a great job. And I quit spontaneously. It was like very stupid. I had like $500 in my bank account. But in a weird twist of synchronicity, PSFK, which is really where I got my start in this industry, was hiring interns. And I was probably like close to 30 at this point. But it was sort of like I had never really kind of known how to find my way, or I was just kind of busy, doing all this other stuff. So I quit, got an internship at PSFK, and I was like writing articles for the blog, and then got brought on full time and started acting as a consultant, and I took over the website. And that was really sort of this big pivotal point where I got to now. And so I guess some of the lessons, number one is like taking risks. Like the job I had was actually like really good. It was like the most money I'd ever made. It was making really good money. And so it was partially a big gamble, but it was also partially like I knew that's what I wanted to do. And that was sort of like a North Star moment where I was like, I can't ignore this because it's like it's going to kill me if I don't do it. And so then it's sort of been kind of a roller coaster through smaller agencies, bigger agencies, and then work for myself now. And kind of as the industry has changed, and now, there was like a super small amount of companies and groups doing sort of like trend forecasting, foresight, strategy, and now there's like tons of them. So it's been really interesting to see how that shifted. And I guess
Has
go
it
ahead.
changed kind of when you went through that experience of, taking that gamble on yourself, and kind of working with both large corporations like a Google or a Reddit, and then coming into more boutique agencies? Has it kind of changed your perception on, what it means to kind of be part of a strategic team and dig into culture? Like, do those companies treat it differently?
Yeah, it kind of depends. I think one of the biggest differences is when you're working with like a smaller agency, like PSFK or Sparks and Honey are great examples, because they were like small, super nimble, scrappy. They are very much paid to kind of like tell the truth about what's going on, where there's a lot less bureaucracy and a lot less kind of layers of like stakeholders and things like that. So I would say that's one of the biggest differences, is when you're working inside a big company, there's like all of this sort of politics and all these people involved. And, and sometimes it's like, you're trying to sort of cater to perceived perceptions instead of necessarily the truth of the market. Right. So but it's been eye-opening working at both scales, because it can be so different. I think you probably have a similar experience. You've worked for both like big organizations and smaller ones.
Yeah. For me, being able to see the inside of like a large company like Pfizer, it just proves that there's a lot of, there's a lot of politics at play. There's a lot of, red tape. There's a lot of inefficiencies. I feel like at one point when I was working at Pfizer, I had helped to kind of grow the internal team in there from like scratch. And even though we were kind of inside this, playing within this big organization, it felt like there was a little sense of, I forget, we were like rogue. We used to say that we were always going rogue because we were too small for anybody to really care, but we were,
Right.
kind of going at it. So it felt like it was like little fish in a big pond, but that it felt like we were, had a hand in something, that we were building something. So it was like that small boutique mindset within the larger corporation. And then once we started to grow and get bigger, and then people started noticing and trying to kind of take over that thing, then it didn't feel as good.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of where I'm at now, where I'm like, I really don't know that I want to be part of that conglomerate or that large like holding company agency model, because I've seen too many people, how they're treated in that model, as opposed to something that's a little bit smaller and more manageable.
100%. I've had both experiences inside the big companies. Yeah, and also I think there used to be a sense of security with these big companies and or holding cos, where like you felt some sort of sense of like, okay, this is going to be stable. But as we've seen with like the layoffs, across these big organizations, it's no longer the case. And I know a lot of people who still work inside of these companies, and they literally are like in fear every day of like something happening, because it's just numbers on a spreadsheet. Oh, yeah. But I'll tell two stories about that. So when I moved into, outside of boutique agencies and into Google, it was like a huge culture shock. And like, even though it was amazing, like everything, the position, the team, I almost like wanted to quit and go back the first week, because it was so different. Some things were good, but it was just such a shock of like, but fortunately my team was then able to move in that kind of more free fashion of that, like going rogue and like kind of, having that like creative freedom, to kind of find these like insights that were, not normally brought to the table. So my team at Google was called Human Truths, and it was basically, a lot of these internal teams would just kind of put big numbers on a slide, like here's the big stat about what people are searching for. But it wasn't telling like the human story, like why was this happening? Like what are all the different reasons? What are the nuances behind these behaviors? And so that's why we were brought in. So we were kind of able to operate in that fashion for a while. Similar at Reddit too. And like I think to your point, there comes like, unless you kind of really manage it well, there comes a time where the team starts to become too big, or like you said, they're kind of like noticed by the larger group, and then sort of those old behaviors start seeping back in. And that's a great question actually for anyone running one of these teams who like truly wants to, keep it at its best. It's like, how do you, especially in a big organization, how do you maintain that culture? Because it's basically, I think, in a lot of smaller agencies, it's like, I know Summer Friday, a lot of these agencies are trying to stay like right sized, because it's like once you start growing too much, whether it's inside of a big company or whether you're an agency, all kinds of crazy things happen. So I think that's, yeah. And I don't know if anyone's completely cracked the code, because it's like, it's always a danger, especially inside these big companies.
Do you think that affects how you may approach a project or your job? Like if you know that you're part of this big conglomerate and you kind of have to toe the line a certain way, that maybe it, it keeps you from wanting to kind of step out of line, not step out of line, but you know what I mean? Like think a little bit crazier, be a little bit more adventurous in that kind of stuff. Yeah,
because it's like it becomes more about sort of like proving the current hypothesis, instead of like saying, actually, we should be doing something different, or actually the reality is different. So I'm trying to think. So one time at Google, we were talking about like the future of like healthcare or wellness. And we had a report we created just about like big trends we were seeing in the industry. And we had Weight Watchers there one day that were doing the presentation for it. It was like the CEO of Weight Watchers, the executive team. And this is when keto was like first kind of starting to emerge, but it was not mainstream by any means. And it was basically so far removed from their model of reality that like they were in disbelief. They're like, this can't be true. This is fake. And we were like, well, it's actually like, searches are growing. If we look at kind of anecdotal evidence, if we look at people we've talked to, it's really worked for them. And there is some sort of historic precedent. So a lot of times in sort of my field of like strategy and research, it's helping to like bring people into this future state, because it's so different than what they currently believe or what's currently working. And it's a delicate balance too, because you don't want to have the timing too off. I think one of the mistakes a lot of people make is like extrapolating behavior too soon. It's what I would call like flying car futurism, where it's like they're kind of talking about these spectacular things which aren't really grounded in reality. But yeah, that's the thing. But if the organization kind of isn't more creatively free, they're not going to say these things. They're going to kind of cater the research towards the current belief systems, as to not like lose the client or whatnot. It's a delicate balance.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering about how you are currently you would consider yourself unemployed right now, or just kind of between projects.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of both. So basically, so I'm running my one person business, and the difficult thing about that is, a lot of times you might like start proposing a project, but like the company's not ready yet. It's playing that waiting game. So I'm doing a little bit of both, because I have some projects I'm doing now, projects that I'm waiting to start, which that's very excruciating, because it's like they're like 99% going to happen, but it's like the timeline is out of your control mostly.
Right.
So I can riff on that, but at the same time, I'm also like, okay, if I find the right full-time position, I will go for that. I will like sunset most of my business except for like, classes and newsletters and things like that. So yeah, I think for me, the waiting game, whether you're talking about waiting to hear back for applications you put out or waiting for clients to come in, that's been the worst for me, because it's just like time moves so slow when you're waiting for these things to, it's like waiting for something to come in the mail.
Right. And you feel like you don't have much control over it. If in a position like yours, when you've worked with companies, it's like they're looking to you for insights and answers all the time. And like, hey, tell us how we should approach this, project or this problem, or, give us the information we need to, hit our sales goals or whatever the case may be. And then when you are without that, it's like, well, do I have my own personal strategy? Have you thought about, becoming your own strategist and, using your skills to approach how you either land a new gig or get new business or, find what it is that motivates you? Has that, is that something you use to your advantage?
I do. I go. So it's sort of like, which hat do I put on today? It's like, do I put on the send out resumes and look for jobs hat? Do I put on the let me develop some new content? Or like, I have a couple of classes that I teach live, and I'm like, okay, do I sit down and record the online version? So it's that, I think that's sort of the challenge of like, what do I do today? Because it's like, I could do all of these different things. Which one is going to have the highest payoff? Probably the one I've leaned into the least is like applying for jobs in the traditional sense, because it's like, one strategy is to like apply to anything that kind of might be in your wheelhouse. Like, okay, versus like, this looks really good. And so that's one thing that I've changed is like, I won't apply unless it looks like really solid fit, both for skills or both the company. Because I know like in some ways it's a bulk numbers game. Like you see some of these posts of people who track it and they're like, I've sent out 350 different resumes and I've only gotten back like 5 calls, 2 interviews. So to me, the volume play, I don't think is worth it. I think it's too stressful. People say there's these like AI softwares to do it. So for me, it's like focusing on that specifically, or you were talking earlier about, kind of doing it through networks. I think that's still good. So that would be that's the one challenging thing of kind of being in between, which is, I think, where a lot of us find ourselves. But yeah, I've also had advice from people who are like, people who are like, okay, you just got to like structure your time. So maybe one day a week is for, traditional job search. Then like one day a week is for doing your content. So yeah, I think you're right. It's like, you totally do have to come up with some sort of strategy, because otherwise like every day is a blank slate in kind of the worst possible way. I don't know.
So, I mean, in that way, it seems like, and I've been through this myself. It's where I just started when I really felt like I started to come out of the funk that I was in. It was just as simple as opening up the notes app on my phone and getting everything out of my head and saying, all right, I don't have a job. I'm sitting here in my room, right in my house, feeling bad for myself, feeling like I'm not productive in any way or not good at anything in any way. So I'm just like, all right, what can I accomplish? Whether it was the most meaningless task around the house, and I could physically start to check things off, right? And then that went from like, do the dishes and fold the laundry to, hey, I'm going to do this. Like, I'm going to create this prop for my Halloween display out in front of my house.
100%.
I'm going to take the time to do that and feel like I'm being creative. So it was like the daily checklists, and then it was the checklist that forced me to be creative and work with my hands. And then it was, all right, now I'm going to, I kept leveling up as I went. And even, that forced me to change my strategy. Like you said, with sending out resumes, it was the first few weeks were just bombard LinkedIn with my resume and try to get it out, apply to as many jobs. And now it's like, all right, I'm trying to be a little bit more targeted. I'm using AI to maybe help me craft a custom cover letter or adjust the copy on my resume. That stuff takes a little bit more time, but it feels like maybe you have another shot or a better shot at getting something. And then it's just the pet projects, which hopefully can turn into something kind of like this. I know that you've now become the CEO of an AI music label.
That was
So talk to me about how you're using your creative brain to kind of have some fun.
So I want to jump back to your small wins thing later because it's super important. But yeah, so latent space disco. I've got my stickers here.
You got stickers. That's awesome.
Yeah. So this came out of two things. Like number one, I've been using AI slowly but surely, and just this last summer, a lot of really crazy developments have happened, which I've been like heavily tracking and involved with. And then I started using Suno to make some music, and it was incredibly fun. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to actually release this music. I'm going to, come up with a record label. And yeah, I mean, it was partially because I was just really into it, but also, giving me something kind of creative to do to output outside of like business stuff. And it's so funny. My post announcing that I was the CEO of Latent Space Disco got so much traction on LinkedIn. I think the algorithm somehow I can almost guarantee you they spin those up. I had like hundreds of comments and likes. And I think some people didn't get that it was like my label. So that's been good, and I used this. So it was a great thing because it's like, even though I come from a DJing background, I had to learn how you distribute music, and I've like found platforms that'll like do it for you. So my songs are like, they're on all the. You're probably doing this with the podcast. So that was really, really good, and I think it was like a great creative outlet that wasn't just like staring at my screen, like make business happen. And so, to jump back, one of the most important things for me is to like get off the computer, because it's like, otherwise I'll just like, I'm like, grinding at the computer, like looking at LinkedIn, doing posts. So I think number one, your strategy of like small wins is super important, because it's like, it's easy to feel like you're like overwhelmed with this like task of like trying to like, break out of where you are to get to where you want to go next. And so like, for me, getting off the computer, doing little things around the house, leaving the house is a big thing for me, because it's like very easy if you work from home to like never or barely go out. So I think doing the little wins thing is important. Getting off the computer, whether it's, even if you're going for walks and like you can like take notes and have AI transcribe it or whatnot, that's been really useful. I've used AI to like help me like craft cover letters or resume or copy. But I don't know if you've played with the advanced voice mode on ChatGPT. You can actually like talk to it like you would like a friend or a therapist. It's fascinating.
That's cool. I just turned on the Canvas option for it. So like when you go in, you can then select certain things and ask them to change, but I haven't used the voice feature yet. So I've been in ChatGPT heavily, helping with certain things, even the podcast. But I'm gonna have to check out the voice feature.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I've another experiment I've been doing is I've built a bunch of bots which live in Discord. So this is one of the there's a I think it's called shapes.ai, and so like I just discovered that they had these bots running on different Discords. And so I've created a bunch of them that are like on my kind of like professional network Discord, and I've made a couple for myself. I don't know. It's weird. It's like building a little like support network of AIs. It's I don't know. It sounds kind of crazy unless you experience it, and you can kind of program them to do different things. Because that's the thing. Like, I don't know if there's that much. This is a great point of like in-person sort of support groups for people going through these challenges. Like I made a Discord. There's only a handful of people. It was called Job Board, like board of the search. And that might be a thing.
Yep.
Like a lot of people just kind of, oh yeah. Thank you for joining. A lot of people are scared of Discord though, so they're not on it a ton. But I think there's a need for that. I think, there may be groups, but maybe I don't know, because I think it's mostly people just doing these posts about what's going on, and and then the conversation sort of happens in the comments. But I think there's probably a real need for some sort of both from a practical standpoint of like what are strategies that are and tactics that are working for all of us, but also just a support group, because otherwise it's this very kind of like public thing on LinkedIn, which is like I think sometimes can be good, but sometimes people had the "I'm desperate" flag. I don't know if you saw that on their profile pictures.
I've seen people doing fun or new things with their avatar, adding different flags and just putting posts out there that, they're at their wit's end and they're doing anything to get seen. So,
yeah.
And it's gotten a lot of traction.
Yeah. I think it's a good thing, but I feel like there's probably a need for some more of a like semi like private group scenario. I'll have to do research. Maybe these things exist, but yeah.
There is one I had just come across. It's one that popped up for me literally right after I posted about the podcast, was something called Laid Off. There's a woman, I forget her name, sorry, off the top of my head, but it's same thing. It's a Discord community and people talking about, it's like a support group, online support group that's not cuts through the noise of LinkedIn and is a little bit separate. Because I think you're right. Like just sitting and staring, I've spent hours sitting and staring at LinkedIn and just doom scrolling LinkedIn. And sometimes it's like, you get a little bit inspiration, and sometimes it just makes you feel worse because, you've got hundreds of people out there applying to jobs or posting their hardships, and it's like, and it's tough for everybody.
LinkedIn needs to understand their own platform better, because it's like for people who are like, putting content out or looking for work, those notifications are super important. But then you'll get a notification for like some whatever that's like, some random person in your network posted their, so that's frustrating as a LinkedIn user. And then also, so having the same experience of like being on LinkedIn constantly, I'm not sure what it's become. It's such a, it can be a great place, but it's also like a bizarre place right now. And it also feels like very singular. It's like where else can you kind of have this professional or semi-professional networking?
Have you been put into an AI group chat yet in LinkedIn? Have you been added?
Where they ask you for your...
I've gotten requests to be added to, a group chat with similar people, whether it's creative directors or creative professionals. And you're just lumped in with people that may have the same kind of like looking for work tags or the same title. And then it starts like, there's a bot in there that just tries to generate conversation, and people are like, what is this? They're in there for like 3 seconds, and sometimes it'll ask the same question.
It sounds like a bad
doesn't
bot.
really do anything. It's so like misses the mark, and people just leave, but it sounds like they're trying to do something like that or with AI, but.
And they have games on LinkedIn now too. I don't know if you've noticed,
games,
but they have,
that's all we need is games.
It's like becoming like a Yahoo, so yeah, I mean, I don't know, not to go too far off tangent, but like, I think there's a need in the marketplace for something different, because it's like your options right now are like LinkedIn or I don't know, like Fiverr, or I'm not sure. So it's like, or just like we've been talking about building up your own presence, maybe whether it's like with your podcast, it's like developing like a mailing list or, kind of a community in that sense. But let me jump back to what you're talking about. What have you learned from, I don't know if you did this yet, but what have you learned from like the professors at Drexel and like the younger generation? Any insights, or is it kind of a similar situation?
I didn't actually get a chance to go down that route, so I haven't had a chance. I'm hoping to talk to people through this, add people in, have people on that are just starting out and maybe feeling overwhelmed. So I definitely want to connect with those people, reconnect with the professors that I had, and talk to people that are coming out of college. So I don't have that insight just yet, but I can imagine it's just as daunting as someone in our spot that's trying to start feeling like they're starting over.
Yeah, from my just reading of stories out in the media, it seems fairly similar. There's another like wrench being thrown in the process of like ageism, which is sort of fascinating and disturbing. So there's like, I think one of the challenges of being like a more senior person is like, they're like, oh, they're going to want more money, right? That's what a lot of it comes down to. And then it's like you're fighting against maybe people starting out with junior people, but then some of these people who are like slightly older, it's like they have to like disguise their LinkedIn, and then like they have to like make them. It's so messed up, which is like another whole aspect.
I've taken the dates off of when I went to college. You know, we have it on there because it's part of a resume, but I've removed the dates because that thought has crossed my mind. Is like, you know, is that factoring into people or the AI bot that's looking at my resume? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised. I have a friend of mine who, okay, none of this is too direct, but he's in the creative field, like really unique, really highly skilled, and for whatever he's facing, you know, both challenges, probably ageism, probably just like the market itself, and so he's doing like he's doing regular jobs right now to pass the time and make money. I won't say what it is because that would be too specific, but and I know there's other people that are like, you know, thinking of that. In some ways it's good because it like gets you off of this like doom scrolling LinkedIn, but on the other hand it's like you're not in the game, so it's like how do you divide that time?
Right. How are you approaching that? I mean, are you has the thought crossed your mind about shifting your focus or changing your focus when it comes to kind of the next stage of your career?
Yeah. So one of the main things, which is like a lot more labor intensive, but it pays off over time, is sort of like kind of owning, like, so I've done this online class and I'm making a video version, and I put out some sort of like free material that people are really interested in. So it's just like maybe shifting the focus of like who my market is, right? So it's like the market, you know, there's going and getting like an official W-2 job or sort of like consulting for those levels of clients. But then there's like another kind of market for what I do is people in my industry. So that's been one shift, which I'm trying to navigate, of moving over, you know, a portion or maybe all of what I do to serving a new market. So it's just been a mindset shift because it's, you know, the offering is going to be slightly different. The price points are obviously going to be different. That's been one. I have thought about being a mailman or something, so I can like walk, you know, take my mornings, walk, getting a lot of exercise, and then, you know, having that, you know, cushy government job in the background while building my business the other part of the day. Haven't pursued that yet. So those are two things of like shifting strategies. The other thing which I need to work on better is my kind of market for my skills is very much within the world of like advertising, marketing. And so I think thinking outside of that, like the you know, the research I do could be useful for like financial institutions or for other groups that like aren't within this kind of bubble. And so that's something I've been thinking about too, about how do I market myself, reach these people. So it's simultaneously like figuring out what's really resonating within that kind of core market or community that I serve, but also thinking adjacently, because I think, yeah, for me, it's just been, you know, it's worked being within this world, but I think thinking outside that is super important. So that's something that I've been thinking recently about, like different avenues or just markets. How about you? Has your strategy shifted at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, my experience has been the majority of pharma, right? And there's no lack of you know, pharma agencies or jobs out there. I, you know, I've applied to hundreds of them, and kind of the Northeast corridor tends to be very much pharma centric. But it's kind of like, you know, having that self-doubt of, you know, I've been in pharma for so long. Would it make sense at this point for me to try to switch to retail? Or what do I know about, you know, consumer products or B2B that's not necessarily related to life sciences, right? And so I tend to shy away from those applications because I'm like, you know, I'm already frustrated with the amount of resumes being sent out and not hearing back. You know, am I going to throw it out there for that where I know I'm definitely not going to hear back. I don't know. I think it's kind of a mindset change that you have to go through, and just trust your skills, applying, like, I think you said, trying to like apply that are kind of adjacent to your skills, and not being afraid to, what's the worst that's going to happen? Just like any other thing you apply to, if you don't hear back, oh, well, at least, you applied and maybe you do hear back. I think one of the things, and I used to always I should take my own advice when I was back at Pfizer in the early days and we were still hiring designers, I was not afraid to look at or talk to people that didn't have pharma experience, because you can be taught, right? There's processes and procedures. And if you've got good leadership and good workflows in place, if they're a good designer, they're going to, catch on. They're going to do well in pharma, just as if, that work that translates from one large corporation to another, maybe going from pharma to finance or something. It's all relatable. And if you have people in there that are good leaders and there's a good process in place, the best designer that I ever hired wasn't from pharma at all. Most of the people that I hired at the time were from, magazine production or print production or packaging or, B2B, didn't have any pharma experience, and they turned out to be some of the best designers and best creatives.
100%. I think, you shoot yourself in the foot if you just keep hiring more of the same, right? Because they're not going to bring anything new. So that's number one. I agree with you. Like, I think if someone has the core skills or the capabilities, they can be taught the industry. That's why it's very frustrating when you see a lot of jobs and they're like, must have this certain experience, when like, that what you do can totally translate. So I think for companies in general, having a non-homogeneous workforce is advantageous. Although I feel like they probably get scared in weird economic times, but that's how you break out of it, by getting new points of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this goes back to what we talked about earlier, where, a lot of people in leadership are being let go, and then there's this large gap. Mm-hmm. And then you've got people that are coming up that are juniors that are trying to figure it out. And there is that gap of leadership that could help, bring people along and teach people the ropes. And I think it's kind of a vicious cycle, right? When you lose people that have that experience that can train and teach and mentor, when that grouping of people is now gone because their companies are trying to save money or for whatever reason, then the industry suffers.
Yeah, I mean, that's knowledge. That is like genuine lived and earned knowledge. And I think you're spot on. And then what's left is like, junior, senior people, right, who haven't maybe seen the full spectrum of, like, they kind of only know the now, in the worst sense of the word. That's a larger conversation too, just in general, of being so kind of like, I don't know, now hyper focused on the now and not like thinking through the what's happened. I don't know. It's a really big story. It's sort of like how a lot of the like old internet is disappearing. And so like a lot of this knowledge, this lived knowledge is harder and harder to access. But
yeah, let me I just kind of want to get back to your experiences. And, I'm still kind of, the fact that you mentioned when you were still young in your career that you bet on yourself and quit your job and all that stuff to kind of go for what it is that you thought would make you successful and what you loved is intriguing. And it sounds terrifying, right?
Yeah.
But so now that you're where you are now, has the definition of success changed for you compared to when you kind of started in the industry or made that decision to bet on yourself? Like, and now that you're between projects or you're trying to get things off the ground, like, has your perception of success changed in what you want in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a couple of different things. I think there's a lot of superficial success, right? That I think can come, whether it's like a job title or, like giving speeches and like, which I've done, like, and I don't want to say all these things are superficial, but I think there's a lot of when you've gone through the process and like where we are now, a lot of that superficial stuff doesn't matter, or kind of, I don't want to say being cool, but like there's like being efficient or being effective, and then there's like being, I'll say cool because the lack of a better term. It's sort of a perception thing of like where, like things you're speaking at. Just let me know if you're getting this, because it's like there's yeah. So there's like being good at what you do, and then there's like these sort of like accolades and like coolness, for lack of a better term. So none of that matters to me anymore. For me, it's number one. It's like obviously monetarily, it's like you got to like make a living. So like that's what's your like baseline of like I can't do this work for less of this, because it's like, you know, it would be kind of crazy waste of time, because you could be pursuing other things. So it's like figuring out like what your baseline is. The other thing too is not undercharging, going all over the place, but so what's your baseline, but like also like not undercharging if you're doing your own work, because it's like that's very easy these days. It's like, you know, I got to get some work. So it's like figuring out like what your kind of standards are, both realistically, and both it would be kind of a waste of time to do work for that low of a thing. And that's I've seen people out there kind of talking about this. And then I think it's about like doing the best work possible and or differentiating yourself. So this is like a big thing. So like I'm looking at my corner of the industry, and there's like tons of freelancers, tons of agencies of all size. And I think a lot of these big agencies will probably collapse to some degree, because it's like with AI and all these tools, you know, like big holding companies, big ad agencies, big research agencies. It's only a matter of time. So it's like you're competing with all these different players. And so for me, I'm thinking about also how to differentiate, like almost to niche down to like what I do versus what I don't do. So for example, like a lot of people will produce like trend reports that they'll sell, right? And I have whole issues with that. Or the models of business, right? So like the whole, like looking at some of the agencies and like the like pitch process and all this stuff. So I've been really inspired by like people like Brett from Design Joy, who he's one of the first people who did this like subscription based design service for a flat fee. And so like I've been playing with the models for myself too. It's easier for me. It's probably easier for the clients of like, for this flat fee, you can get these different types of deliverables. So it's both like niching down about what I do. And I've been thinking a lot about this the last 2 weeks, versus like projects that I, you know, probably wouldn't do. So it's like sort of limiting the scope, and then, you know, how to stand out, right? So it's not like I offer this one specific thing. You can go hire these other companies to do the other parts of it, or you can do it internally. In this whole discussion, it's like figuring out like what the floor is, and then figuring out like different models, and then also niching your skills. How about you? What are the core things you've learned through this?
To me, it's just getting out of your own head and putting yourself out there. You know, really the only, whether you're trying to, you know, noodle on starting a business or doing a pet project like, you know, the podcast or the AI music, or you can make a career out of pretty much anything. And sometimes it's driven by necessity because you're out of work and you kind of have no choice. But sometimes it's, you know, you kind of have a good idea of what it is you want to do and what you're passionate about. But I think you just have to have a bit of resilience and try not to be, you know, I keep saying get out of your own head, but like, don't be afraid to do that. You know, to me, it was terrifying to press record. And then it was terrifying to press submit or, you know, post on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because you're afraid of what is going to happen. Or, you know, you're afraid of submitting an application to a job that may not be right up what it is, you know, your alley, and in your specialty, but you think like you may be able to handle it. You submit it anyway. And so it's a matter of kind of doing it. And if you're afraid, do it scared. You know, I feel like that's kind of been the big thing for me. And it started to bring me out of that funk that I was in. So it's like, I'm trying all these things. I'm trying to stay productive. And, the idea that like 3 weeks ago, I didn't have this podcast and now I have a guest on a podcast is mind blowing to me, but also like it's exciting,
Yeah.
So I'm trying to go back to the times when, what was I doing in my career when I felt excited about what I was doing? And it's like, there seems to be a theme there for me, at least, that I'm discovering, is that when I felt like I was creating something and owning something that I had some control over,
Totally.
it's given me the most inspiration. And now I'm, connecting with people like yourself or anybody else that kind of feels the same way. So what does that resilience look like for you in this kind of stage where you're at?
Yeah, I think to your point earlier, it's about having these small wins and things that you have control over, because I think a big theme as we've been talking is like the feeling of lack of control or lack of control, because it's like, you're up to the whims of the market if you're not owning it. And so I think even if it just gives you that feeling to keep going, it's worth doing it. I guess the other thing too is to talk to people outside of your industry. Like you said earlier, is like you can make a living doing anything. And I think it's also just important because it gives you inspiration and hope that there's stuff outside of your world. For example, there's a guy in my town who he was recently laid off, similar thing, laid off a couple times in the last couple years. And he had a podcast or has a podcast about like board games. So he's developing this business where he'll like come and do like board game parties, whether it's for kids or for companies. And so it was great talking with him and kind of like giving him ideas that like he might not have, or like me getting inspiration, because on one hand I'm like, that's crazy, but it also could work. So I think it's important to like break out of the bubble of LinkedIn or your industry, both for advice, inspiration, and just to show you that there's a world outside of your world.
Yeah, I think that, my closing question to you was going to be, what's that one piece of advice you could give a job seeker in this environment, or even thinking back to, you're in the environment right now, and it's like, what advice are you going to give to your younger self to help you get through these types of situations?
So it's sort of like, I'll go back to when I first got into my industry, and so I had started my own a couple of blogs, which I wanted to get into blogging and trend forecasting. Those are my two big goals. So before, there was no genuine route to kind of go to the school for it at that point and then get it. So like I had to like kind of not fake it till I make it, but kind of like act as if. So I was like, okay, I'll just start my own blog. I'll start writing about these topics. And then that sort of gave me both the confidence and also like a small body of work that I could show off. So it's like, I would say for anyone who's like trying to either like level up, get into a new field, just start engaging or creating content around whatever that is, and just putting yourself out there. That's the main thing. I think just simply sending out resumes is like, it clearly does not work for a lot of people. So it's like you have to create something outside of that very linear path, whether it's a podcast or whether it's like posting on LinkedIn or doing your own social media. I think for all stages of people, you have to figure out some version of that these days, because otherwise you're just another name in like a sea of people. And so that I did that, and my advice is the same for myself now. It's just figuring out like what angle is gonna work, like both for you and both for your audiences. And then always be expanding your network. Like, I mean, I think your network is not just LinkedIn. It's like everyone you've worked with, and there's lots of advice about like staying in touch with people and like reaching out, and then expanding your network outside of your world, right? So like, meeting people from all kinds of industries, whether it's just a friendship or whether you get some advice from it or you maybe get some work. So I think those would be, those are all. Yeah, some version of that is always going to work. There's no downside to all of that.
Yeah, I think the thing that I've learned about this, and the advice that I would give is there's a lot of people out there that want to provide support. There's a lot of people that are in the same situation, in the same bucket. And, I think about that quote from Fred Rogers, where it's, when there's in times of struggle or, bad things are happening, you look for the helpers, right? That's the advice. Look for the helpers. And, they're out there. People want to support. You start seeing these things crop up, like the Discords and the mentors that are out there offering services and help. It's definitely helped me to be able to find a positive route through my own unemployment, right? And trying to find out, what I want to do and where I want to go. So don't be afraid to reach out, I would say is kind of my advice to people.
100%. Well, thank you for creating this podcast, because I think it becomes sort of a beacon of that, of that there are people to reach out to, because otherwise it's like, I think a lot of people probably don't know where to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I hope that, that's kind of my goal here, really, is just to try to help in some way. Because, we all need it.
For sure.
So hopefully that brings a little bit of exposure to people, but also kind of exposes that everyone's going through a lot of the same thing, and there's help out there. Thank you so much to Dan Gould for being my first ever guest on the show, and thank you for joining me on the Flame Podcast. There's definitely more to come. Please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any feedback or you'd like to join me on the show, send me a message. I'd love to hear from you.